What if Russia won the Russo-Japanese War? In our own timeline, a conflict broke out between the Russian Empire and Empire of Japan over control over Manchuria and Korea in 1904. Japan would end up winning, being the first Asian country to defeat an European one in the modern era. But what if that didn't happen? What if Russia won the Russo-Japanese War? In this timeline, Russia is far more successful and the Imperial Russian Army would defeat the Imperial Japanese Army. In the Treaty of Portsmouth, Japan would lose the Great Korean Empire to Russia, who would puppet it. Russia also keeps Port Arthur and still occupies Manchuria. When the Xinhai Revolution broke out, Russia formally annexed Manchuria. By the time World War I broke out, Russia is a far greater power, but this comes at the cost of Japan joining the Central Powers to reclaim Korea and Manchuria. Japan also invades French Indochina and together with the Ratanakosan Kingdom, Malaya and Burma. They also take North Borneo and besiege Weihai, Hong Kong, Kwangchuan and later Macau, and assist the Germans in New Guinea against Australia. The United States still join the Entente and Japan invades the Philippines, Wake and Guam. In Russia, the October Revolution still takes place and the Soviets ask for an armistice. Germany still takes Poland, Lithuania, the United Baltic Duchy, Belarus, Ukraine, Finland and Georgia, while the Ottomans take Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Empire of Japan annexes Korea and establishes the Empire of Manchuria led by Pai and Primorje led by Marshal Admiral Shimamura Haya. But the Central Powers still lose the war, and after Germany sued for peace on November 11, 1918, Japan saw the writing on the wall and sued for peace on December 1, 1918. In the Treaty of Versailles, Japan doesn't get the Mariana Islands, Palau, Caroline Islands and Marshall Islands, but the United States. In the Treaty of Saint Chiron, in which they lose all of their gains from Russia, and also their concessions in Tianjin and Shanghai to the United Kingdom. Furthermore, China gets back Formosa and the United States take the Marcos Island and Iwo Jima. At first the Allies weren't sure what to do with Manchuria and Primorje, but after the collapse of the Russian state during the Russian Civil War, they invite Alexander Kolchak to rule over Primorje, whose name he changes to Transamur. The Soviets attempted to invade Transamur, but were beaten by the United States and forced into an armistice. Without a Fengtian clique, the Anhui clique wins the Zili-Anhui War and takes them over, but in 1921 the Republican Kuomintang in Guangdong and the monarchist king in Manchuria form an alliance, and in 1922 launch the Anti-Anhui War. Mongolia and Tibet also join and the Anhui clique collapses. Tibet annexes Qinghai, Mongolia takes Jiangsu and Ningxia, and the rest is divided between the Qing Empire in Beijing and Republic of China in Nanking. The First Sino-Qing War breaks out in 1924 and the Qing win as the Republicans are forced south of the Yangtze River. But in 1928 the Second Sino-Qing War breaks out and the former status quo is re-established. They also agree to recognize each other and that the remaining warlords chose their master. The Republic of China got Guangxi and Yunnan, while the Qing Empire got the Ma, Shaanxi and Anhui. After the Great Kanto earthquake, the military overthrows the government. Taisha is forced to abdicate in favor of his son and a new constitution is signed. The emperor holds little to no power and democracy is dissolved as the nation becomes a stratocracy. Transamur would have a relatively high population as almost every white émigré of opponent of Stalin went there. Plus, with the white émigrés they have a fine military staff, and with US investments they become rich, and have a relatively modern armed force with M1917 and later M2 tanks, and Se.5A and later B-17 planes. Vladivostok's population would also triple, becoming Russia's third most populous city. In Italy, Benito Mussolini still becomes Duce in 1922, and in Germany Adolf Hitler still becomes Führer. In 1939 World War II still happens with an invasion into Poland and later Denmark, Norway, the Benelux, France, Yugoslavia and Greece. In 1941 Germany still launches Operation Barbarossa. Meanwhile in Vladivostok, Kolchak, who always despised Hitler because of his Lebensraum plans, realizes that this is his opportunity and launches an invasion into the Soviet Union. White émigrés who infiltrated the Far West rise up, and the Soviets are pushed to the Lena River. Franklin Delano Roosevelt orders his troops to not launch operations, but also to halt any attack by the Soviets, meaning they are only fighting in defense. Korea and King China also join as they are part of the Far Eastern Tripartite Pact, and King China invades Xinjiang and Mongolia. Japan and the Republic of China under President Wang Jinhui form an alliance against the Far Eastern Tripartite Pact. Knowing that this will mean war with the US, Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, but doesn't go to war against the United Kingdom because of their weaker position. Japan would first take over Korea and the Philippines, but the US would push Japan back after the Battle of Midway, and in 1943 Japan was forced to surrender. China then asks for an armistice. The border between King China and Republican China doesn't change, and the US occupies Japan. The US don't join the Second World War, but still support the United Kingdom and Soviet Union. After the Battle of El Alamein, Italy and Germany retreat back to Libya, but without Operation Torch the British don't take over Libya. Without an invasion into Italy and Trans-Amur in the war, Germany wins at Kursk. The Soviet advance is stopped, but Germany is not able to push either, causing the war to freeze. In Siberia, Trans-Amur launches a second offensive after Japan left the war. Mongolia completely falls and Russia is forced to the Yenisei River. By 1946 everyone is tired, and a peace conference is held in Geneva. Germany keeps the general government, Denmark French state, Reichskommissariat Norwegian, Nederland, Belgian in Nordfrankreich, Ostland and Ukraine, but has to withdraw from other Soviet territories. Free France gets most of French Africa with the exception being Tunisia, which is annexed by Italy, and Morocco, which is annexed by neutral Spain. Meanwhile, French Indochina becomes the Empire of Vietnam. Italy loses East Africa but gets Nice, Savoy and Corsica, and since the Yugoslav partisans were so successful they got back Croatia, Serbia and Montenegro, but Bulgaria, Hungary, Germany and Italy keep the territories they directly annexed. King China annexes Mongolia and Xinjiang, while Trans-Amur annexes all lands east of the Yenisei River. They also changed their name to the Far Eastern Republic. After the war, a four-way Cold War between NATO, the Axis, the Comintern and Tripartite Pact begins. In 1950 Alexander Kolchak dies because of old age, and he names former Russian President Alexander Kerensky his successor who would re-establish democracy. That same year Mussolini dies and Ciano becomes the Duce of Italy. The Vietnam War still happens, but with Chinese support Ngo Dinh Diem is the one to unite Vietnam, and the Laotian and Cambodian independence wars end in failure. In 1945 the Arab League still gets formed, and without a mass Jewish migration into Palestine it is unlikely that Israel is formed, as they only make up 16% of Palestine instead of 31%. Decolonization would still strike, and while most of Africa became independent, Spain and Italy fight for years against independence movements against Arab guerrillas. Meanwhile, the Anglo-American help France defeats the Algerians, but is forced to give Algerians equal rights. Finland would leave the Axis powers after the war ended, but Spain would join them. In 1952 Japan is re-established under a pro-American republic. In 1955 Hitler dies and Heinrich Himmler becomes Führer of the Greater German Reich. As the Libyan independence war is becoming more brutal, Himmler sends the Africa Corps under aging Erwin Rommel to Libya. In 1960 Khrushchev orders the invasion of Reichskommissariat Ukraine. The Soviets push the Germans out of the left bank of the Dnipro River. The Soviets then launch Operation Bagration, which sees the collapse of Ostland and the Germans being pushed to the Vistula River. Germany expected the Soviets to attack the general government, but instead they push south, causing Ukraine to collapse as well. Romania, which was neutral up to this point, also joins the Allies and attacks Bulgaria and Hungary. Romania also gives back Transnistria to not be invaded by the Soviets. The Germans managed to re-stabilize the situation. In the Far East, President Vasily Shulgin declares war on Russia and invades Siberia. Forces from King China also push into Central Asia, but by far the most forces go to China in a surprise invasion. The Arab League joins the Allies and pushes Italy out of Libya, after which Idris I becomes king of Libya. NATO joins the Second World War against Germany with a surprise invasion into Falangist Spain and Spanish Morocco. In Spain, a second civil war breaks out and the Germans retreat to the Pyrenees. The Soviets realize they can't win a two-front war and would likely collapse, offer peace to the Far Eastern Republic. They get all of Siberia and the Central Asian Soviet republics for peace. The Far Eastern Republic changes its name to the Republic of Siberia, and instead of annexing Central Asia they puppet the Republic of Turkestan under Islam Karimov. They then help the king against Republican China. The Allies land in Italy where Kiev gets overthrown. At the same time the Soviets launch an offensive that ends with the Balkans being liberated. It was at this point that Himmler sued for peace. The Soviets reannex Ostland and Ukraine and puppet Hungary and Slovakia while Yugoslavia and Romania retake their losses from Hungary and Bulgaria. In France, Italy and Spain democracies are re-established. Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Greece and Albania also gain independence, leaving only Germany itself. In East Asia, King China annexes Republican China and Tibet and puppets the Empire of Vietnam. Soon after the war in Germany, a revolution breaks out and Himmler is forced to abdicate, and a liberal democracy under Willy Brandt is re-established, and Poles, Czechs and Slovenes are encouraged to return to their homeland and get more autonomy. After Khrushchev dies, Brezhnev becomes General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, followed by Andropov, Chernenko and lastly Gorbachev. The Soviet Union would still collapse and Hungary and Slovakia gain independence while the Soviet Union breaks up into Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine and Russia. In Russia, a civil war breaks out between the Russian Federation under Alexander Rutskoy and Siberia under Boris Yeltsin. The Russian Federation pushed Siberia all the way to the Ob and Tabal River, but with the Empire of the Great King and Great Korean Empire joining the war, they pushed back Russia and Rutskoy's regime collapses, with Siberia retaking Moscow in 1993 and become Kenji the Second Russian Republic. After the war, Russia and China would slowly emerge as great powers, and Russia would likely still invade the Chechen Republic of Ikaria in 1999, Georgia in 2008, Crimea in 2014 and Ukraine 2022. In 1967, Pai dies and his brother Puji becomes emperor until 1994, followed by their brother Yuzi until 2015 when he died, and Yuzhane becoming emperor of the Empire of the Great King. The world would be similar to our own, with an alliance between Russia, China and Korea, but with the latter two being absolute monarchies instead of communist dictatorships, and the former a federal democracy instead of an authoritarian dictatorship. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.